I've frozen every account, Susanna. Credit cards, canceled. Security, briefed. You'll be homeless by Monday. He adjusted his cufflinks. I suggest you start packing. I looked at him through the mirror, my voice barely a whisper. You're right. Adam Ellis informed me last Friday that our marriage was over. There was no negotiation, no mediation, no therapy suggested. It was a corporate termination, delivered in the master suite of our glass penthouse, with the efficiency of a man who fires entire departments before lunch. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that. It's done, Susanna, he said, placing a leather folder on the bed between us. My attorneys have already filed. These are the terms. I didn't reach for the folder. I didn't need to. Adam was more than happy to walk me through my dismantling. He wanted the penthouse, the one his grandfather had gifted us, though the deed carried only his name. He wanted our vacation properties in Aspen and Monaco. He wanted to keep the entirety of his portfolio, naturally, since I'd contributed nothing to building his empire. And he wanted me gone by Monday. Not next month. Not after I'd secured housing. Monday. When he finished his recitation, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, backlit like some conquering titan in a tailored Tom Ford suit. I don't want this to get ugly, Susanna, he said, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy. Let's be realistic. You're a socialite. You haven't worked in a decade. You have no income, no lawyers on retainer, and no one in this city who'll cross me to help you. He paused, letting that truth settle like frost on glass. My legal team will bury you in motions before you even understand what's happening. It's better for everyone if you just cooperate. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silk sheets we'd shared for 8 years, and looked at this man I'd once loved. This man I'd restructured my entire identity for. He didn't just want to divorce me. He wanted to erase me, to reduce me to a cautionary tale socialites would whisper about at galas. Remember Susanna? Adam left her with nothing, poor thing. His greatest weapon, he believed, was my powerlessness. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and deliberate. Then I looked up at him, my face a careful mask of defeat, and said the 2 words he'd been waiting to hear. You're right. The relief that washed over Adam's face was immediate, visible. He'd won. The trophy wife wasn't going to make a scene. He straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. Good. I'm glad you're being smart about this, Susanna. Someone will be by Monday morning to supervise your exit. Then he walked out, leaving me alone in the pristine cage he'd built for me. Here's what Adam knew. He knew I was a woman who hadn't earned a paycheck in 10 years. He knew I had no financial independence, no professional network, no escape route. He also knew, or thought he knew, that I'd burned every bridge to my old life when I married him. What Adam didn't know. Before I became Susanna Ellis, the woman who wore Valentino to charity auctions and smiled for society pages, I was Susanna Leach. And Susanna Leach didn't attend galas. She infiltrated them. She was an investigative journalist who specialized in white-collar crime, the kind of reporter who'd gone undercover in offshore tax havens and exposed billion-dollar fraud rings. I'd testified before Senate committees. I'd had my byline on the front page of major publications. I'd made powerful men very, very nervous. Adam and I met at a fundraiser I was attending undercover, researching a story about charity fraud in the finance sector. He thought I was there because I belonged. I let him think that. And somewhere between the investigation ending and the whirlwind romance beginning, I made a choice. I could keep chasing monsters, or I could have the life I'd never allowed myself. Security, stability, love. I chose him. I deleted my portfolio. I let my sources go cold. I became the woman he wanted me to be. We had a bitter private argument 3 years into our marriage when I suggested going back to journalism part-time. Adam told me, with the cold finality of a man who doesn't compromise, that his wife wouldn't be some crusading reporter embarrassing the family. He saw my old career as a liability, a phase I'd outgrown. We fought for weeks. Eventually, I surrendered. I convinced myself that love required sacrifice. Adam had witnessed that surrender. He'd watched me delete my credentials from LinkedIn, decline calls from old editors, become someone smaller and quieter. In his calculation, I'd been fully domesticated, declawed. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that you don't forget how to hunt. You just stop hunting. And by cutting me off, by threatening to make me homeless, by stripping away every reason I had to stay quiet, Adam Ellis just gave me a reason to remember who I used to be. I tested my first credit card at 9:47 a.m., ordering coffee through the delivery app I'd used 1,000 times before. Payment declined. I tried the second card, the platinum one Adam had given me for our anniversary. Declined. The third, the fourth, all the way through my wallet. Every single one returned the same cold, digital rejection. He'd been thorough, methodical. Of course he had. Adam Ellis didn't make idle threats. I moved to the kitchen, reaching for the refrigerator out of habit more than hunger. We had enough food to last a week, maybe more. That was something. I filled the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid stream into a porcelain cup that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. Surrounded by wealth I couldn't access, drinking coffee I couldn't replace. Through the window I spotted him, the security guard Adam had mentioned. He stood near the private elevator lobby, phone in hand, posture casual but alert. Watching. When I moved from the kitchen to the living room, his eyes tracked my movement like a surveillance camera programmed to follow motion. I counted 3 more guards throughout the morning. One stationed at the service entrance, another in the building's parking garage, visible from the south-facing windows. A third I only noticed because of his reflection in the glass, positioned in the hallway outside our door. 4 men, all on Adam's payroll, all with instructions I could only imagine. Don't let her leave. Don't let her access anything. Don't let her contact anyone who might help. I sat on the cream suede sofa, $47,000, I remembered absurdly, and looked around at the monument to our marriage. Everything here bore Adam's aesthetic, Adam's choices, Adam's control. Even the art on the walls had been selected by his interior designer. I'd been allowed to live here, certainly, but I'd never truly owned any of it. My phone sat on the coffee table, fully charged but essentially useless. No banking apps would open. No ride-sharing services would accept payment. Even my email felt compromised. Adam's IT team had built our entire digital infrastructure. But there was one thing his team hadn't built. One thing I'd kept hidden, even from myself, for the last decade. And it was still here, if I could remember where I'd buried it. The guest closet was where I kept the things Adam never looked at. Seasonal decorations, out-of-style handbags, a collection of winter coats I'd never worn. And in the back corner, beneath a stack of monogrammed blankets from our wedding registry, sat a vintage leather trunk I'd bought at an estate sale 13 years ago. I dragged it into the bedroom, my hands already remembering the weight of it. The brass latches clicked open with a sound that transported me backward through time. Inside, notebooks filled with margin scribbles, printed articles with my byline, a press credential from a financial crimes conference in Geneva, relics of Susanna Leach, the woman I'd boxed up and stored away. My fingers found the seam along the trunk's interior lining, the one I'd cut and restitched myself. The false bottom lifted easily, revealing the slim black rectangle I'd hidden there a decade ago. The external hard drive looked harmless, outdated, even. But encrypted inside were 5 years of investigative work. Source contacts, encrypted communication logs, financial documents I'd obtained through channels that were legally gray at best. I'd promised myself I'd destroyed everything when I married Adam. I'd lied. I retrieved my laptop and connected the drive, muscle memory guiding my fingers through the encryption password I hadn't typed since 2016. The screen flickered, then populated with folders organized by investigation, corporate fraud, tax evasion schemes, shell company networks, money laundering infrastructures. And there, buried in a folder labeled Archive MISC, was a document I'd completely forgotten about. A preliminary research file from 2015, back when I was building a source network in Manhattan's financial district. The document contained names, companies, and preliminary red flags I'd identified but never pursued. One name jumped off the screen: Ellis Capital Management. I'd flagged it for potential investigation. Offshore account irregularities, unusual foundation structures, board members with questionable backgrounds. But I'd never followed through because 3 weeks after creating this file, I'd met Adam at that fundraiser. I'd been so focused on the charity fraud angle that I'd never connected Adam Ellis to Ellis Capital Management, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to. I opened a second file, cross-referencing the foundation structure I'd noted in 2015 with my memory of Adam's current corporate empire. The patterns aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. My husband hadn't just frozen my accounts and threatened to make me homeless. He'd handed me the exact motivation I needed to finish an investigation I'd abandoned 10 years ago. And he had no idea I'd been building a file on him before we'd even met. On the charity fraud angle, that I'd never connected Adam Ellis to Ellis Capital Management, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to. I opened a second file, cross-referencing the foundation structure I'd noted in 2015 with my memory of Adam's current corporate empire. The patterns aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. My husband hadn't just frozen my accounts and threatened to make me homeless. He'd handed me the exact motivation I needed to finish an investigation I'd abandoned 10 years ago. And he had no idea I'd been building a file on him before we'd even met. This chapter maintains the sophisticated thriller tone established earlier, while revealing Susanna's hidden resources and creating dramatic irony. She'd unknowingly been investigating Adam's business empire before they met. The discovery positions her to use her dormant investigative skills against him, following the revenge story structure, where the protagonist's hidden advantage becomes their weapon. The service elevator was the key. Adam's security team watched the private elevator like hawks, but they'd overlooked the one the housekeeping staff used. At 2:15 p.m., I changed into the plainest clothes I owned: black jeans, a dark sweater, sunglasses, and slipped past the guard stationed near the kitchen by timing my exit with the housekeeper's departure. The city felt foreign after a decade of chauffeured town cars and valet parking. I took the subway for the first time in years, paying cash I'd found in an old coat pocket. $47. Everything I had to my name. The bar was exactly where I remembered it. A narrow establishment in the Lower East Side that catered to journalists, investigators, and people who preferred conversations that couldn't be subpoenaed. I found Marcus Chen in a back booth, looking exactly as he had in 2015. Wire-rimmed glasses, rumpled blazer, the perpetual expression of someone who'd just uncovered something disturbing. "Susanna Leach," he said, not bothering to hide his surprise. "I heard you died and came back as a socialite." The reports were exaggerated. I slid into the booth across from him. "I need information on Ellis Capital Management." "Everything you've got." Marcus studied me for a long moment, then pulled out his tablet. "Still doing forensic accounting for the FBI? Consulting." "Why?" "Because Ellis Capital has been on our watch list for 3 years. He turned the screen toward me. "Your husband's fortune isn't what it appears to be. The foundation that supports his philanthropic work? It's a sophisticated tax shelter. His overseas investments? Laundered through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. His quarterly earnings reports? Creative accounting that would make Enron blush." I scanned the documents, my old instincts reading between the lines of financial statements and corporate filings. Adam's empire wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And it was fragile. "Why hasn't anyone moved on this?" I asked. Marcus leaned back. Because he's protected. Half the city's elite have money tied up in his funds. Prosecutors who might investigate him get promoted to private firms he controls. He's built a fortress. Fortresses have foundations, I said quietly. And foundations can crack. What are you planning, Susanna? I met his eyes. Adam just made a critical mistake. He gave me nothing left to lose. Marcus smiled, the expression of someone who recognized a fellow predator. Then let's find the cracks. Adam returned home Saturday evening, expecting tears. He found me in his study instead, sitting at his mahogany desk with a glass of water and an expression of perfect calm. Still here, I see, he said, loosening his tie. There was amusement in his voice, the tone of someone indulging a child's tantrum. I thought you'd be on your knees by now, begging me to reconsider. I looked up from the leather portfolio I'd been examining, one of several he kept in the locked cabinet I'd picked open that afternoon. Why would I beg? You made yourself very clear. The amusement flickered. He'd expected dramatics, desperate pleas, perhaps some undignified attempt to seduce him into changing his mind. My composure unsettled him, though he tried not to show it. What are you doing in my office? Looking for a marriage certificate, I said smoothly. I assumed I'd need it for the proceedings. I hope you don't mind. He stepped closer, eyes scanning the desk. The portfolio I'd been reading contained corporation documents for his Cayman holdings, information I'd photographed 20 minutes earlier. But on the surface sat innocuous papers, old tax returns, insurance documents, exactly what someone preparing for divorce might need. You should be packing, he said, an edge creeping into his voice. I will. Tomorrow. I stood, smoothing my sweater. No point rushing when I have until Monday. Over the next 2 days, I maintained the same unsettling composure. I didn't pack suitcases. I didn't cry. I didn't make frantic phone calls or send desperate emails. I simply moved through the penthouse like someone conducting research, opening drawers, examining documents, taking mental inventory of everything Adam had built. Sunday night, he found me in his home office again, this time photographing a filing cabinet with my phone. What the hell are you doing? He crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the phone from my hands. Taking pictures of my jewelry, I said calmly. For insurance purposes, in case anything goes missing during the move. He checked the phone's photo gallery, saw images of diamond earrings, necklaces, watches. Nothing incriminating. He handed it back, but suspicion had replaced amusement in his eyes. You're acting strange, Susanna. I met his gaze without flinching. I'm acting practical. You taught me that. Remember? He left the room without another word, but I knew the Cold War had begun. Adam Ellis was finally starting to wonder what his wife was really doing. I found it at 3 a.m. Monday morning, 6 hours before Adam's deadline. His personal safe, hidden behind a sliding panel in the master closet. The combination was laughably predictable. His mother's birthday, the same numbers he used for everything he thought I didn't pay attention to. Inside, beneath stacks of bearer bonds and his passport, sat a leather-bound ledger that didn't match any of his official accounting systems. The entries were handwritten, dated, meticulous. Each page documented transfers from something called the Monday Fund, an account I'd never seen mentioned in any of his corporate filings or tax documents. The amounts ranged from $50,000 to $500,000, each accompanied by initials and cryptic notations. ARM building permit approval, $75,000. JC zoning variance, $120,000. DS tax audit closure, $200,000. It took me 20 minutes to cross-reference the initials with public records on my phone. Robert Morrison, City Planning Commissioner. Jennifer Cole, Zoning Board Chair. David Sullivan, Senior IRS Auditor. Adam hadn't just built his empire on fraud, he'd paved the road with bribes. The final entry was dated last Monday, exactly 1 week ago. Quarterly disbursement scheduled February 3rd. $2.4 million. Must complete before audit. February 3rd. Today's date. The realization hit me like cold water. Adam's urgency wasn't about the divorce. It was about the money. The Monday fund was housed somewhere in this penthouse, likely in the safe I was currently holding, and he needed me gone before he made his quarterly payments to the officials who kept his empire protected. If I were still here, still legally his wife, I could become a liability, a witness, a loose end. I photographed every page, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This wasn't just evidence of tax evasion or creative accounting. This was a federal crime, bribery, corruption, the kind of charges that came with prison sentences, measured in decades. Adam had been so focused on controlling me that he'd forgotten the golden rule of investigative journalism. People who think they're untouchable make the sloppiest mistakes. I replaced the ledger exactly as I'd found it, closed the safe, and checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. In 8 hours, Adam expected to find an empty penthouse and a compliant ex-wife. Instead, he was going to find out what happens when you corner a predator and mistake her silence for surrender. The law firm occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of office designed to make people feel small. 3 attorneys sat across the conference table from me, 2 men in identical navy suits, and a woman whose expression suggested she'd perfected the art of corporate intimidation years ago. Mrs. Ellis, the senior partner began, sliding a document across the polished surface. We're here to finalize the settlement terms. As you can see, Mr. Ellis is being quite generous given the circumstances. I glanced at the paper without touching it. The generous terms gave me $50,000 and 60 days to vacate. Everything else, the penthouse, the properties, the investments, remained Adam's. And if I don't sign? The female attorney leaned forward. Then we proceed to litigation, which, frankly, you cannot afford. Mr. Ellis has authorized us to pursue this as aggressively as necessary. We will file motions, demand depositions, drag this through the courts for years if needed. You'll be bankrupt before we even reach trial. It was a performance I'd seen before, back when I'd interviewed witnesses who'd been threatened into silence by corporate legal teams. The message was clear: surrender or be destroyed. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table, screen facing up. Before I decide, I think you should hear something. I pressed play. Adam's voice filled the conference room, crystal clear. Moved another $200,000 into the Monday fund. Sullivan needs his quarterly payment before the audit closes. Without him, the whole tax structure collapses. Hell, half my offshore holdings would be flagged for investigation. The recording continued for 30 seconds. Adam discussing bribe amounts, naming officials, casually admitting to tax fraud that would interest both the IRS and the FBI. The room went silent. The senior partner's face had gone pale. That recording, I said calmly, is backed up in 3 separate locations, along with photographs of his ledger, documented transfers, and a very detailed file I'm prepared to share with federal prosecutors. I stood, smoothing my jacket. So here are my terms. Adam signs over half of everything legitimately earned, not the offshore accounts, those can rot. Or, I deliver this evidence tomorrow morning. You have 24 hours. I walked out, leaving 3 attorneys staring at a phone that had just detonated their entire strategy. The call came at 11 p.m., 18 hours after I'd walked out of that conference room. Marcus Chen's voice was tight with urgency. Susanna, don't go home. Adam filed a police report claiming you stole jewelry and corporate documents. There's a warrant out for your arrest. I stood on a street corner in Brooklyn, my breath visible in the February cold. On what grounds? Theft, trespassing, corporate espionage. It's complete fabrication, but he's got a detective in his pocket willing to process it. They're at the penthouse right now, probably planting evidence to support his claims. Adam was making his move. If I were arrested, the evidence I'd gathered would be confiscated. buried in an evidence locker while his attorneys filed motions to suppress it. By the time I made bail, if I could make bail with no money, the Monday fund payments would be complete, and his bribed officials would disappear any trail connecting them to his crimes. How long do I have? They've issued a bolo. Every precinct in the city is looking for you. Maybe 24 hours before they track your phone or flag a credit card transaction. He paused. Except you don't have working credit cards, do you? No. Which meant I couldn't rent a hotel room, couldn't buy a bus ticket, couldn't do anything that required digital payment or identification. I was effectively invisible, but that invisibility came with a countdown timer. Marcus, I need you to contact the FBI field office. Tell them I have evidence of ongoing federal corruption, and I'm willing to testify, but it has to happen tomorrow morning. Not next week. Tomorrow. That's not how federal investigations work. Then make it work. My voice was steel. Because in 24 hours, either I'm in FBI custody presenting evidence, or I'm in NYPD custody watching Adam destroy it. I hung up and pulled the battery from my phone, eliminating the tracking signal. The February wind cut through my coat as I walked toward the subway station, carrying nothing but a thumb drive, and the knowledge that I had one night to outmaneuver a billionaire who just declared total war. The Monday deadline had passed. Now we were operating on a different clock entirely. The Ellis Capital Management 25th Anniversary Gala was held at the Metropolitan Club, a venue Adam had chosen specifically for its exclusivity and the implicit message it sent. We've arrived. I entered through the main doors at precisely 8 p.m., wearing the one thing Adam's lawyers hadn't thought to freeze, a Valentino gown I'd purchased 2 years ago. Security recognized me immediately. Mrs. Ellis. The wife. They hesitated, confused by my presence but unwilling to create a scene by stopping me. The ballroom was exactly as I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, Manhattan's financial elite mingling beneath oil paintings of dead robber barons. Adam stood at the center of it all, holding court with his board of directors, radiating the confidence of a man who believed he'd won. He saw me and his face went white. I crossed the marble floor with the same calm I'd maintained for the past week, my heels clicking with metronomic precision. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. By the time I reached Adam, half the room was watching. Susanna. His voice was barely controlled fury. You're not supposed to be here. I know. I'm supposed to be homeless, remember? I raised my voice just enough that nearby guests could hear. But before I left, I thought your investors deserved to know what they're actually funding. I nodded to Marcus Chen, positioned near the main entrance. He handed a stack of folders to the waitstaff, who began distributing them throughout the ballroom. Board members opened them. Investors scanned the contents. I watched their expressions shift from confusion to horror. Those documents detail the Monday Fund, I announced, my journalist's voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. A bribery operation your CEO has been running for years. The recipients include city officials, federal auditors, and zoning commissioners. The evidence has been delivered to the FBI. Arrests are expected to begin tomorrow morning. Adam lunged for me, but 2 federal agents materialized from the crowd, Marcus's 24-hour miracle. They weren't here to arrest me. Adam Ellis, the lead agent said, you need to come with us. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Investors shouted questions. Board members fled for the exits. And I stood in the center of the chaos, no longer the discarded wife, but the woman who'd just dismantled an empire. The news broke before Adam's arraignment was even complete. Ellis Capital Management stock plummeted 47% in the first hour of trading. By noon, the SEC had frozen his assets pending investigation. By evening, 3 board members had resigned and 2 investors had filed lawsuits. I watched it unfold from Marcus Chen's office, my phone buzzing with calls from reporters who'd somehow obtained my number. Every major outlet wanted the story. Socialite wife exposes billionaire's corruption. Trophy wife turns investigator. The headlines wrote themselves, though none quite captured the truth. The penthouse was mine by Wednesday, not through the divorce settlement that had been nullified when federal prosecutors seized Adam's assets, but through a peculiar quirk of property law. The deed, it turned out, had a co-signer clause from the original purchase that Adam's attorneys had overlooked. His grandfather had required both our names. Adam had been so confident in his control that he'd never bothered to change it. I stood in the master suite that Friday evening, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of amber and gold. The same windows Adam had stood before when he'd delivered his ultimatum, when he'd been so certain of my powerlessness. My phone sat on the marble vanity, displaying an email from my former editor at the Financial Crimes Bureau. They wanted me back, not as a contributor, as their lead investigative correspondent, with full editorial control and a substantial contract. Susanna Ellis, the ornament, the trophy, the woman who existed only in relation to her husband's wealth, no longer existed. But Susanna Leach had never really disappeared. She'd just been dormant, waiting for the right motivation to resurface. The FBI estimated Adam would face 15 to 20 years. His empire, built on bribes and offshore fraud, was being systematically dismantled by the same agencies he'd thought he'd controlled. The officials he'd paid were cooperating, desperate to reduce their own sentences. I picked up my laptop and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked with infinite possibility. Adam had been right about one thing. I would have been homeless by Monday if I'd followed his script. But he'd made the fatal error of underestimating the woman he'd tried to erase. And now, standing in the ruins of his empire, I was finally home. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought, and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.